Hey students, so I couldn't physically be there with you guys today or through this week because of the work stoppage, but I still think we need to continue on for our units so we're not too far behind when we get back. We do have the AP test in a few months, so we should be ready for that. Alright, so this is the Oscar Wilde essay analysis explanation. The Oscar Wilde essay is the last assignment for this unit, minus the character design, which is the poster where we kind of find quotes about the body parts. But we'll finish that once we're able to go in class because that's a group assignment. Alright, so a lot of the documents that I mentioned in this slide will be able to be found in the folder you found in Unit 3, Oscar Wilde essay analysis. Alright, so let's get started. So the actual essay prompt is, over the last several weeks, we have read Junot Díaz, The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, and you should know Junot Díaz because he's the author of this 350-page book, a story that contains several main characters that contribute to a larger story and pervading theme. As discussed in class, a complex character is a character that grows, changes, and develops throughout a narrative. All the main characters that we have studied, Oscar, Lola, Bella, and Junior, are complex characters because events and experience help add layers to their story and personality, creating motives and flaws. So that's the essay description, but the actual prompt is on the next slide. So in a 6-paragraph essay, and that may scare you, but I actually outlined every single paragraph later in the slides. In a 6-paragraph essay, examine one of the major characters from Oscar Wilde, paying close attention to how that character establishes themselves as a complex character and analyze how their growth reinforces one of Díaz's intended themes. So the key thing for essays like this and in the future, analyze is very different from summarize. Summarize is tell me what happened, whereas analyze is tell me why, because I already know they're complex characters. I already know the themes. But your job as an analysis is to show me why these things occur. So just in case you forgot, a complex character is a character that changes throughout the story because events that occur within the narrative. So here are 3 examples that I provided. So if you have seen this newest film, Spider-Man Into the Spideyverse, Miles Morales is a very interesting complex character. When he starts the story, he's scared and unprepared. Although he has some courage, he's not ready to face the evils. By the time we get to the end of the movie, he's ready. He's experienced. He has the know-how to, face his villains. In the movie Mean Girls, Cathy Herring, she comes from Africa, right? She's the exchange student, and she doesn't understand how teenage culture works. She is naive. She is the fish out of water, meaning she doesn't know what's happening. So by the end of the film, she's able to learn how to navigate teen culture. She learns how to play the games that the other girls are playing with her. So from beginning to end, she's completely different. She goes from a naive young girl to a more experienced, more understanding, more knowledgeable person. So last one, Marlin from Finding Nemo, and that one is a movie that most people should have seen by now, hopefully. At the beginning of the film, because of the death of many of his kids, Marlin is very protective, maybe overprotective of his only son, Nemo. So when he goes missing, he freaks out, obviously. Throughout the story of the film, he's able to gain courage and understanding of what it means to be a father without being overprotective. So by the end of the film, if you remember, he has to trust Nemo to the extent where Nemo goes out and saves Dory from the fishes and other things. So from beginning to the end of the story, Marlin is able to grow as an individual, as a character. And we care about these characters because they have that change. One bad example of a non-complex character, we call them flat characters, are something like Peter Griffin from Family Guy. So in any episode of Family Guy, you'll see that Peter starts one way. He is selfish or foolish or just kind of an idiot. So by the end of the episode, nothing has happened, nothing has changed, and that happens a lot in comedies. But that is not a complex character. From one episode, let's watch The Simpsons or something. whatever happens in one episode, it doesn't really carry over to another episode. So those characters aren't complex. Complex characters are characters that actually change and develop in a story. So we have four main characters in our story: Oscar de Leon, Lola de Leon, Belicia Cabral, and Junior. Each of them have their own experiences, and all of them have changes. You can see Lola change from this very rebellious young girl to a more understanding mom by the end of chapter, I think, 7 or 8. Belicia, obviously, you might, if you wanted to do your essay on Belicia, that would require you to look at chapter 5. I know not all people were able to look at that because it wasn't required, but you see her as a infant, and you see her in chapter 2 as this older adult, and you see her in chapter 4 as an adult, but in chapter 3 she's this young rebellious girl who's looking for a better life. So there's a lot that happens to Belicia. Junior is difficult because he's the narrator, but if you kind of read between the lines, in chapter 4 you see he goes from this super machismo type of stereotypical frat boy. I mean, he's not in a frat, but he has that sense of, he's overly critical of Oscar because of his weight, because of his nerdiness. But by the time, also he cheats on Lola and all his girlfriends a lot. By the time he gets to the end of the story, he's reflective. He even calls Oscar his best friend. He knows that Lola is the love of his life, and he messed up. So Junior changes significantly. All these characters do. Some themes in the story. All these themes: otherness, power or lack of, identity, coming of age, love and violence, gender roles, all of them apply to each character. And in this essay, what you need to do is select one character and one theme, and you want to see how the development of that character is able to further the theme. How does Junior fit the theme of power? How does Oscar fit the theme of otherness? Otherness means that they're different, that they don't fit in. What experiences in Oscar's life make him feel like he's an other? Or identity. Identity is a major theme of the story. All of them are trying to figure out who they are. Oscar, he's this nerdy kid that is the anti-version of what it means to be a Latino male. He's not that. They always tell him that. Is Lola, she's trying to figure out, is she a perfect daughter? Is she this rebellious girl? Is she this, is she in love with, I forgot her boyfriend's name for now, but there are versions of this. So all of them fit any of the themes, and there's no easier versions, there's no harder topic. It just depends what you want to follow. A little more kind of details about the themes. There's gender roles. Gender roles is this idea that characters must fit into these prescribed stereotype genders. Does Oscar fit this idea of this masculine male? Or how does Junior, maybe he's overly qualified to be this masculine male to the extent that it kind of ruins his relationships, right? Coming of age, we'll explain that a little more later. Otherness. Otherness means that they feel like someone else, so that they feel different from the mainstream population. Power or powerless. We talked about power sort of at the beginning. We kind of said that some of them have power. Lola felt like she had power when she was able to finally take charge of her life and kind of escape the grasp of her mother. Belly felt power when she was able to develop her body, and she found that as an escape. Oscar's life is more of being powerless. Most of his life, he didn't have control of his weight, of his personality, but he gets some power towards the end. You may disagree with his decisions in chapter 6 and 7, but you can't argue that he has power. He takes control of his life, even if it's a dumb decision, in your opinion. Identity. This is a key theme in most stories, especially about young adults. They're trying to figure themselves out. All the characters are trying to figure themselves out. Love and violence is a major theme. So if you notice that almost all relationships in the story have a violent end. So you go from early in the story where I think her name was Anna, and Manny, which was the girl that Oscar was in love with from his SAT class. She was getting abused physically and emotionally. Let's look at Belly in chapter 3. She fell in love with the gangster, a 40-something-year-old man who really didn't treat her the way she should have been treated. Or you look at Oscar. Every time he was in love, he couldn't overcome his emotions. Um, so these are themes you can work with, and they kind of fit in with any other character. It just really depends what you're interested in. If you kind of forgot what coming of age meant, coming of age is something like The Breakfast Club, Juno, Superbad, Boyhood, Mean Girls, The Fault in Our Stars, Perks of Being a Wallflower. All these are examples of a coming of age story. And the coming of age story, or its official term, Bill Dung's Roman, is a genre that deals with the transition from childhood to adulthood. Focusing on education, development, and maturity. So, if I were to create a thesis, and my main suggestion for when you're writing is always think of your thesis first. It's like Googling or putting the directions to somewhere, right? How are you know where you need to go if you don't know the address? So the key thing is creating the thesis first. So let's imagine I wanted to write an essay on the theme coming of age, and I selected Oscar as my individual I wanted to analyze. A bad thesis is Oscar's change in the story represents the theme of coming of age. That is a type of thesis that I tend to get from you guys when you're writing very quickly. That isn't good because it doesn't really tell me much. Oscar's change in the story represents the theme of coming of age. I know that. That's not anything that is controversial. That's not anything that's very interesting. A good thesis, gives us more information on the topic. So Oscar's development in the story helps reinforce the theme of coming of age through his tumultuous experience and a realization that love is more essential to life than sex. That's better than the first example because it's able to give me an understanding of what Oscar learns, and then it gives me a preview of what we're going to talk about in the rest of the essay. A better thesis than that would be Oscar's growth and development from a nerdy, lovesick boy to a courageous young man that is able to determine his purpose in life, supports the theme of coming of age in the brief, wondrous life of Oscar Wilde. That is a much better thesis because I see where he starts from the beginning and I see where he gets to in the end. And it's controversial, right? You can argue a point. And it's controversial because some of you may be reading that thesis and be saying, how is he courageous? He just went to get himself killed. So from the essay, it's supposed to prove that point. So if you go to the paper that kind of explains the essay, I give you an example of what you need to do for each paragraph. So the first paragraph, it is the story introduction. In this first paragraph, summarize the important points of the novel, focusing on items such as what the story is about, who is the author, and what is the cultural historical relevance of the novel, what larger ideas and themes does the novel explore, how is the story told. When I mean about what is the story about, give me an overall plot viewpoint. What's happening in the story. You could focus on whichever character that you selected. Who is the author? Obviously, is Junot Díaz, and what is a cultural historical relevance? This is one of the first novels that ever deals with the history of the Dominican Republic and the immigrants of the DR. So there is some cultural historical relevance to it. What larger ideas or themes does a novel explore? You can list some of the themes that we mentioned in the earlier slides just to show that this novel is able to kind of extend further. A quick note on that, the themes that I presented from the earlier slides, those aren't set in stone. Those are themes I just selected, but themes are just whatever message you're able to get from a story. And those are the messages I wanted you guys to analyze. Hopefully in the future, you're able to find your own themes. Number 4, how is a story told? Well, that means what is the point of view? Is it first person, third person, first person limited, first person third person limited, third person omniscient. So try to figure that out. And obviously, this one's a little tough because it switches. So here's an example that I posted inside that folder. This is about The Catcher in the Rye. So if I were to follow those exact steps that I needed to put, it would sound like this. The Catcher in the Rye, J.D. Salinger's 1951 classic novel, tells the story of a 16-year-old Holden Caulfield as he is expelled from Pensy Preparatory Academy and spends a weekend traveling around New York City, meeting old friends, trying to dance and drink with girls at bars, and getting drunk. That whole section right there is my quick plot overview. The story is told in first person point of view and is narrated through the mind and eyes of the story's unreliable main character, Holden. With 1950s New York City as the setting of the story, The Catcher in the Rye breaks new ground by exploring themes of identity, coming of age, depression, loss of innocence, and isolation. So I had to make my introduction very short because I had to fit it in the slide. But if it were yours, I would add more to the first part where we kind of tell about what the story is about and a little bit about the cultural context. It's because it is actually an award-winning novel. So let's go to paragraph 2. And actually, this is different than the rest of your other essays because you're actually going to put those headings in. So you'll have story introduction as a heading. All right, paragraph 2, theme and thesis. In this paragraph, choose one of the themes from the box and explain how that theme appears throughout the novel, ending the paragraph with a thesis. This paragraph should answer. So you're wondering, why did we wait this long to put the thesis? Well, because I wanted to, it's a little longer essay, and we wanted to give some context to what the story is about and the cultural impact of it right before we talk about the theme and the thesis. This paragraph should answer, what is a theme and what are some major themes in the novel? Why is this theme that you have selected important to understanding the overall message of the text? What are examples of this theme? And then last, thesis. How does the story of one of the characters help reinforce or reveal this theme? Thesis example number 1, Marlin's growth from an overprotective father to a more understanding parent by the end of Finding Nemo helps shape the overarching theme that strong relationships are built on trust. Thesis example number 2, Walter White's transition into the infamous Heisenberg in Breaking Bad reinforces the theme of how power can corrupt. In the example I provided here, I kind of just go through that paragraph quickly. Themes are defined as the main idea, underlying meaning of a literary work, and are developed and explored throughout a story. As mentioned above, The Catcher in the Rye explores the themes of identity, coming of age, depression, loss of innocence, and isolation. Of these themes, depression seems to be the most subtle because of the nature of how the story is told and who Holden Caulfield is. By looking in between the lines, readers can easily see how there is a sad and morose undertone throughout the book. On the surface, Holden seems like the typical annoying teenager who cares about superficial high school activities such as sex, drinking, and smoking. In the midst of Holden's absurd rants and delirious interactions with old friends and new people, there are small moments where he shares some insight into his life. After the death of his brother, Allie, Holden is emotionally unstable, and this leads to him doing poorly in school and searching for companionship throughout the story. This moment leads to a climax at the end of the story when Holden is screaming to his brother that has already passed. Allie, don't let me disappear, please, Allie. Salinger 175. The theme of depression is seen through the various symbols and metaphors, but most of all is explained through the narrative arc of Holden Caulfield. Holden's growth and development from an angry, superficial, closed-off kid to a young adult willing to face his emotions helps shape the subtle but overarching theme of depression in The Catcher in the Rye. So in my example that I wrote, I kind of explained a little bit more detail about the selected theme of it and how this character slightly goes through these themes. At the end, I kind of give a thesis that kind of wraps it up. All right, so those first 2 paragraphs are really an introduction. The next 3 paragraphs are where you're actually going to explain things. So this is the key. This is where you have to use your knowledge of the book. And the good thing about this essay is even if you don't remember the whole story, you should be able to successfully complete this because I focus on one character. If you're doing Oscar, he has more chapters. It's chapter 1, chapter 4, chapter 6, 7, and 8. If you're doing Lola, chapter 2, chapter 4, chapter, she's towards the end of 7. If you're doing Junior, he's a narrator kind of throughout, so you have to kind of figure it out, but you don't really understand who he is until chapter 4. Belly is kind of sprinkled throughout, but her main chapter is chapter 2 and 3. And if you want to know her backstory, also chapter 5, which gives her experience as an orphan. So in paragraph 3 to 5, you need to be able to answer these questions. 1. How is the character characterized at the beginning of the story? What important events or experiences help shape who the character is? How does the character change throughout the novel? What kind of change is it? How do these changes help reveal the theme? So keep in mind, change doesn't always mean a good change. A character can change for the worse. A character can become more cynical in life. So, for example, Belly, she her change, she becomes colder. You can see her early on, even though she's still rebellious, she's still a little more loving. But towards the end, she's very cold towards Lola. Like her change is going to be like a rough mom, right? So tips: do not summarize the text. And that's a big no-no. I know what happens in the story. Remember, the difference between summarizing and analyzing is summarizing tells me what happens, analyze tell me why these things happen. So, why does Junior change? Why does Oscar have this giant revelation? When using examples or quotes, spend more time analyzing the importance of these quotes. Don't just put the quotes. All right, so now we're going to get into the meat of the essay. You can consider the first 2 paragraphs as a very long introduction. The most important part, besides the thesis, is actually proving what you're setting out to say. So from paragraph 3 through 5, we're talking about the actual character development. In paragraph 3, here's an example way, a sentence starter. At the beginning of the novel, Holden is characterized by his. So we talked about character traits before. How is the character at the beginning? If you had to describe Oscar at the beginning of the story, what kind of person is he? If you had to describe Lola at the beginning of the story, think back to when we were doing the character maps. What kind of person are they? What character traits, from personality to how they look to how they interact with people. That should be paragraph 3, and give me examples from the text. Paragraph 4, by the middle of the novel, there is a change. So paragraph 4 should deal entirely with what sparks the change in the person. What causes Oscar to change? You could argue that he changes because he goes to the Dominican Republic and he's able to meet Ebon and kind of gets out of the state of depression. What changes Lola? You could argue that she has these bad experiences with love. Or you can argue that she changes from a submissive daughter to a more confident individual because she's able to escape the grasp of her mother, when her mom has cancer. Or you could argue that she finally realizes that she needs to find people that actually care for her. So, she breaks up with Junior and finds her own family. For all the characters, there's moments where they change, where they become a different person. You have to look for it. Junior is the super machismo type character at the beginning of the story, and somehow something happens and he considers Oscar his best friend at the end. He's regretful for all the things he did for Lola. There's this one quote in the story where he kind of says that if only I could say those 3 words to Lola, things would be different. But he was too proud, too masculine to kind of express his feelings. All right, so we get to paragraph 5. From the beginning of the novel to the end, Holden proves to be a complex character. So in this paragraph, you're actually going to show me why this character changes, right? Or the change that occurs. So you compare the events of the beginning to the events of the end and explain how his change represents this themes, whatever theme you selected. So, you selected the theme of coming of age in Oscar. How does Oscar's events and experiences in the story establish that theme? That's where we kind of wrap back to our thesis to figure it out. When we get to paragraph 6, it's just your conclusion. So, in the final paragraph, answer the following questions. What is the reader supposed to understand about the text? What larger idea or deeper meaning are they supposed to walk away with? Relate this deeper meaning to what you have been arguing. Can readers relate to experiences of the character you have discussed? Why? So instead of your basic conclusion, I want you to kind of give me an understanding of what's the purpose of this. Is there a purpose? And some people criticize the book. They're like, well, this story is just about Oscar trying to get laid. But I think there's more than that. I mean, do you really think if you read those last few lines of the story that was the purpose of the text? He says stuff like that the real moments that matter were those moments where he would sit there with her and she would tell him his secrets or the how she felt as a child. So the purpose of the story really will change from person to person, but it's not as superficial as you may think. All right, so let's get to requirements. MLA formatting, so you should be used to that by now. It's me typed. Include a title, don't call it SC, don't call it Oscar Wow. That's boring. It should be typed, double space, 12 point, 12 point in Times New Roman. So some tips. So let's get to using quotes, right? This is one key area that I think that most people struggle with, and I'm getting to the end of the slide, so don't worry. All right, so number one, when you're using a quote, provide context for each quotation. So when I say context, don't just throw a quote in. You have to tell me where that quote matters, like what's happening in the scene. So if you're trying to explain how Oscar is at the beginning, give me some context before you use a quote. So you want to use a quote about him having 2 girlfriends, give me a sentence or like a few words to kind of introduce that moment. Attribute each quotation to its source. Quotes don't exist by itself, meaning a quote shouldn't end with a quotation point, a quotation mark, and start with quotation mark. There should be he said, she said, and don't just put he or she. It should be the narrator. Oscar says, Lola says. Every quote has an owner, and you have to tell me who is saying that. Junot Diaz, it shouldn't be attributed. So it's his story, but it's not his voice, right? So the voice is either the narrator, which is Junior, or a specific character saying that quote. Quotes don't exist by themselves. After you explain a quote, this is a key thing. So you have to explain the significance of the quote. How this quote supports that paragraph and how support your thesis. And when you get to the end of a quote, you provide a citation for the quote. Citation for MLA is, so we have quotation mark, we put the quotes, end quotes, parentheses, author's name, the page number, and that's key. It counts as stealing if you don't put that citation. So put the page number, parentheses, period. If you notice, the period goes after the parentheses. That's the correct way of doing it. Look at that. All right, last slide. When you're using quotes, don't just simply say a word. Oh, he says, she says, Oscar says. There are so many more words to use. Adds, announce, remarks, exclaims, argues, declares, notes, observes, suggests, complains, replies, states, purposes, propose, and so you don't have to use the ones I list here, but there are so much more words to use. I should have added a second slide, but some other things you should do is not use words like I, you, me, we. You're trying to be objective in your writing, and avoid contractions. I think that's all for now. Good luck with the essay. If you have any questions, just message me, and hopefully this wasn't too horrible to listen to. All right, see you guys soon.